A historic movie theater gets a new lease on life, and a new book examines the history of coffee in St. Louis. That's all next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. A new book out explores the history of coffee in St. Louis and how it really played a key role in the city that we are today. We're going to examine that a little bit later. But we begin with Cinema St. Louis, which is bringing new life to a historic theater, the High Point. And I'd like you to meet our guest right now. She's the executive director of Cinema St. Louis, Bree Maniscalco. Hi, Bree. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you?
Nice meeting you for the first time.
You too.
Because you've only been on the job since, I guess, last summer.
July.
Right.
Yes.
Congratulations.
It's been a roller coaster.
But I know, just briefly, though, you've been involved with Cinema St. Louis for a long time, a bunch of years. So how did all that happen, and what have you done in the past?
Yeah. So I'm originally from Utah. And when I moved out here, I didn't know anyone. So when I found out there was a film festival, I started volunteering for Cinema St. Louis for SLIF, which is our largest film festival, in November each year. And I started that in 2007. And then I eventually joined the board in 2013 and the staff in 2018 as the fundraiser. And here I am now.
Well, you mentioned SLIF, the St. Louis International Film Festival, which is, I guess, what you're known most for.
Yes.
But you guys stay busy all year.
We do. So we started with just SLIF back in 1992. And ever since then, we've added on programming year after year. So now we do the St. Louis Filmmakers Showcase, which just celebrated its 22nd year. We do a Classic French Film Festival, Q-Fest St. Louis, and then our most recent new addition to the family is Golden Anniversaries.
I do a little amateur acting once in a while for like a little local movies and things once in a while for fun. But I don't really know. You tell me. I'm impressed with the local filmmaking scene.
St. Louis has a very strong local filmmaking scene. It is incredible. And for those who haven't come to Showcase to get a sample of the talent that we have locally, they should definitely come. It's each year in July. And we invite people that not only live here, but people whose roots have started here and they've gone on to the coast to do great things. So we'll do master classes and bring back filmmakers that have added a few credits to their name.
And there have been a few successful ones that have come from here.
Quite a few, actually, yes.
Name a few.
John Goodman, Jenna Fisher, Ellie Kemper, Bo Williman, James Gunn. I mean, there's a lot.
I have to ask you about the last couple of years with COVID and everything. Affected any kind of organization that deals with the public and meets in public. And so how did you guys get through that? I bet the first year you probably did nothing.
It was interesting. So we were slated to do our Classic French Film Festival in the spring of 2020, and the world shut down. So we had to quickly shift like everyone else that does live get-togethers. And we were very fortunate in that there are some amazing companies out there that quickly put together streaming options for virtual presentations. So we shifted Classic French, Showcase, and Q-Fest to be a virtual program. And then we thought, is there a way to even do this with SLIF, which normally has up to 400 films? And we made it work. It was very successful. We were really fortunate. And then the next year, we stayed virtual until SLIF, which was a hybrid. It was in person and virtual in 2021.
So are we back to normal now?
We are not back to normal. So this last year, we were entirely in person. And we did, try to do some virtual presentations because people said that they really loved it. They loved not having to get a babysitter to go see the movies. They loved not having to drive at night. There were lots of benefits to it. But people are kind of tapped out of virtual, and some aren't quite ready to come, in person. So our main thing is making sure that we're presenting film that encourages people to get off the couch and have an experience that you can't get when you push play on your TV.
Well, one of the really exciting things, and this is fairly recent news, is that Cinema St. Louis has acquired the historic High Point Theater.
Yes.
And it's going to be like your hub?
Yes, yeah. So we have been a nomadic organization for, ever since 1992. And each year it has been a struggle to try to find a home for our festivals. It depends on if we can afford it and if it's available. And we're vying for the same screen time that studios are paying, top dollar for. So it's been tricky, and this will allow us to have a consistent place to not only show our films, but to do additional programming throughout the year and expand our programs and education programs.
But it's also the fact that the High Point Theater is the High Point Theater that makes it sort of neat. And I don't know the exact address, but that would be the southwest corner of Forest Park.
Yes,
right?
1005 McCausland Avenue.
Right. And didn't it just celebrate its 100th, the building 100th year?
Yes, it did. So it was built in 1922. Its 100th anniversary was last February.
We have some images of it, and let's just talk about it while we look at these. So obviously that's the front of the building from recently, I guess.
Yes, so that shows a little bit of the box office, which is the historic original box office.
Let's go to the next one. That's an old shot.
Yeah, so this is back in the day, and what I've heard is that originally there was a dental office up on that second floor. Works with all the candy you eat at movies, right?
Did it have a particular theme back in the old days? Did it just show the popular Hollywood movies, I guess?
We just show the popular Hollywood movies, yes.
Let's go to the next one. That's a little more recent.
It's more recent, yes. That's when the marquee became, one that glows at night.
And I remember seeing, like 25 years ago, they kind of had edgy movies. Like, I don't know if it was Quentin Tarantino, Rocky Horror, movies, those kind of things, right?
Yes, yeah. And we definitely want to bring those cult classics back. So not only Rocky Horror, but The Room and some other fun ones.
And we've got one more here, I think. This is a recent one.
Yeah, so this is when Jenna Fischer came to SLIF. So this would have been right around 2014, 2015. All of our local legends draw big crowds at the festival, and we were really grateful that we got to celebrate that at the High Point.
Bree, I read an article that somebody wrote about you, I think, when you took this new job, and I think you were maybe discussing COVID and how that had changed things, and you made some kind of comment. I can't quote it exactly, but all that's behind us, so ditch the Davenport. Do you remember saying that or what you meant by that? It was like, okay, I'll refresh your memory. It was about we kind of got used to sitting around on the couch and watching movies on the couch.
Yes.
And I think the point you were trying to make was there's an experience about going to a theater. You see a movie in a different way.
There is. I mean, most of us can easily recall our first movie that we saw in a theater. It's a very magical experience. Something happens when you experience art on a big screen with people who love film just like you do. And so not only do we celebrate that and the culture that lives in that, but we also will often accompany it with discussions after the film with the filmmaker, or if the film is about a book, we'll have the author there. So a way that you can take that conversation to a deeper level, and you can't get that at home.
And really quickly, what are you going to do to the High Point? I'm just guessing it could use probably, I haven't been there in years, all kinds of renovation. Do you have plans for what you're going to do to the physical building?
Actually, so the family, the Graysons, they've owned it since the 70s, and they have loved it like a child. It is in superb condition.
Wow.
They even during COVID took out all of the seats in the historic theater, so that was over 400 seats. They reupholstered, repainted, and added legroom. It's incredible what they've done to it, and it's really turnkey for us. Not only does it have a digital projector, there is a 3D projector, 35 millimeter. The options are beyond what we could ever hope for.
We have a shot here of some kids at a theater somewhere, but I know it's related to something that your organization does. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah, so this is our Cinema for Students program. It's a free educational program we do during SLIF. We were concerned during COVID because we had to also take this virtual. But we served just this last year almost 12,000 kids through the program. And so they get to experience some of the films from SLIF for free and have a discussion with the filmmaker. So this was actually down at the downtown public library. They're one of our venues.
And this next shot is a gentleman that we'll all recognize. I think you mentioned his name a few minutes ago.
Yes, John Goodman. So this was probably SLIF 2018. We did a presentation of The Big Lebowski, and then we presented Mr. Goodman with the Lifetime Achievement Award. And he was so down to earth, so wonderful to work with. He even stayed and watched the movie with the audience.
No kidding.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Do you have any big announcements you can make? Share with us now.
Not yet, but I will say, because we followed the comments when the announcement happened and people are curious, We are not changing the popcorn recipe. So the popcorn will stay
Okay, I can
as
breathe a
is.
sigh of relief.
Yes, yes. We are keeping the prices the same, so concessions will remain affordable. That is very important to us. And then beyond just our film festivals, we'll start introducing some of our own curated series throughout the year. But we also want to bring back some classics when they're celebrating their anniversaries. And, you know, maybe bring back The Godfather. We tried to show it twice in 2021, but just couldn't get it for its 50th. So we might bring that back, and we have a few studios and distributors reaching out to us to offer some films. So it's going to be exciting.
I mentioned kind of the local amateur filmmaking scene. What's your best advice to wannabe filmmakers in St. Louis who are just starting out now? How can they use you?
Yeah, I mean, so through our educational programs, we start young. We offer free filmmaking camps in the summer for kids, and through this undertaking with the High Point, we hope to be able to expand that to be year-round.
I think we have one more shot of the High Point. And are you on a time frame? Do you know when you're going to open the doors?
We are hoping to open the doors, occupancy permit, cross your fingers, January 20th. We have a film slated if we can get everything open in time.
Anybody ever ask you what your favorite movie is?
They have. My favorite is Singing in the Rain.
Why?
I have loved it since I was little. I was a dancer growing up, so anything musical, anything with dance has always just struck a chord with me.
What's the best way for people to find out more about Cinema St. Louis?
CinemaStLouis.org is the best way. You can subscribe to our e-news, and then of course on social media we will announce everything in terms of when we will show movies, what types of movies, and how people can get involved.
Well, Bree, we're excited you have this new position, and I know you've got big shoes to fill. So
yes, it's tough to follow Mr. Freilich.
One very important question before you leave. What does coffee mean to you?
Oh, coffee means making it through the day with a 6-year-old.
Well, you better stick around for the second segment here because we could help you with your life.
Thank you.
Anyway, Bree, Cinema St. Louis, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And the link between coffee and St. Louis, that's next on City Corner.
Visitors and residents love the St. Louis Zoo because it's free. There's a train, a carousel, opportunities to make new friends, and plenty of fun learning experiences with the animals 363 days a year. So come and experience St. Louis.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
I'm Steve Potter, and welcome back to City Corner. And finally, a topic I know something about. That's St. Louis coffee, a stimulating history. That's the name of this new book by Deborah Reinhardt, who joins us right now. Deborah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
You know, I have to say, I thought I knew everything about St. Louis. Actually, really thought I did. I've been promoting St. Louis on shows for a couple of decades. I never knew there was any connection between St. Louis and coffee until your book came out.
Yeah.
I'm like shocked.
Yeah, well, I'm a native St. Louisan, and like you, I learned an awful lot of researching this book too. I had no idea that coffee really was a part of our city since its founding. And the industry stretches into the middle of the 19th century. We were at one time the coffee capital of the country.
I was just going to say that. In your book, you say St. Louis was the coffee capital of the United States.
Yes, we were the largest, let's see that I get this right, the largest inland coffee producer in the country. And at the time, around the 1920s, early 20s, there were about 75 coffee companies here in the city. Comparatively, we're known as a beer town, right?
Oh, I've heard that.
Yeah, but comparatively, around the time when Prohibition was enacted into law, there were 20 some odd breweries compared to the number of coffee companies that were here. So I think coffee is an important story that's not told as frequently as our beer
What's
history.
interesting, I think maybe the reason it was not on my radar because, well, I knew we didn't grow coffee here, so how could we be the coffee capital when we don't even grow coffee beans?
Right. Well, coffee, aside from Hawaii, coffee is not grown in the United States. So in the beginnings of our city's founding, the green beans would come up the river from New Orleans.
It shows you what I know. I didn't even know coffee beans are green.
Right. Well, and then they were roasted in the beginning of our time of history here in St. Louis. Women would roast the beans in skillets at home, and then they'd have to grind them using a mortar and pestle kind of thing, very labor intensive. And then with the beginnings of the steamboat and railroad era, more of the raw coffee was brought up river on steamboats and on rail cars.
And were we the capital just because, back then we were one of the biggest cities in the United States and this far west? Was that the reason?
Well, I think that was one of the reasons. And then the reason this was combined with the push west in the 1840s or so. And so people would land in St. Louis to outfit their wagons to go west, and there were tons of grocers on near the riverfront, and many of them would outfit the family's wagons, and coffee, flour, sugar was included. Right, yeah.
Right. We have a couple of images from your book, St. Louis Coffee. Let's look at those right now. The first is Martha Washington, which I always associated with George.
Right. Well,
it looks like Mount Vernon.
Well, this is an example of an advertising card that that the early coffee companies would use by ways of trying to make to build brand loyalty. Mm-hmm. And Forbes Coffee was one of the first in the city to roast coffee commercially. They started in 1853, and the roasters, like I said, they'd base like a baseball trading card almost. They'd print these advertising cards and have them distributed to build brand loyalty.
Let's go to the next image. This is of a gentleman, and who is he?
Yes, this is Julius Schotten. His father, William Schotten, founded the William Schotten and Company also in the 1870s. And he would go. Julius would go on to help found the National Coffee Association, which is in existence today. They had their foundings here in St. Louis at the old Planters Hotel.
Another thing I learned from your book, and I need you to explain this to me if I read it correctly, is that nobody really knows how coffee came about. Or
what's the story of coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, according to legend.
So it's true, no one really knows.
Well, you're right. But coffee was founded in Ethiopia, and then from Ethiopia, it made its way to Arabian countries, and from there, in the 16th century to Europe, and then finally over to the U.S.
I brought something to show you today, because you're a coffee lover, so I imagine, don't you have a favorite? Doesn't everyone have a favorite coffee cup?
And it depends on what cup you use, how the coffee's going to taste.
No, come on.
Yeah, well, that's what I've heard. I think it's true.
Another legend. But I just want to share this with you. This is my coffee cup that I've had for about 15 years at least. So yeah, I guess it's a mental thing, right?
Right. Yeah, your favorite. We all have a favorite.
I wanted to make the people here at STL TV happy, so this is my second favorite coffee cup, which is an STL TV coffee
Well done.
cup.
Yes.
So, just want to set the record straight there. What's your favorite one?
I have one that says a day without coffee is like, just kidding, I don't know.
That's a good one. Let's look at some more images from your book, St. Louis Coffee: A Stimulating History. And this next one, blanks?
I think it's Blankie.
Blankie.
Yes, yes, this is the interior of Blankie Coffee. The owner for this company was Cyrus Blankie. He came from a small town in Illinois. And he founded his company in the 1880s, and he would go on to become one of the more successful coffee men in the city. His company lasted until his death in 1942. But what's really interesting about Cyrus is he was a master marketer. Many years before the Clydesdales showed up, he had a thoroughbred horse named Village Boy, and he was using the horse to help in his advertising and marketing campaigns. He had a very big presence at the World's Fair here in St. Louis, and then Blankie had purchased and moved Grant's Cabin from, I think, Webster Groves to the Forest Park site that was used as an attraction during the fair.
Huh. This next image we have, I think it goes back to World War I.
Yeah.
So tell me what we're looking at here.
This is a shot from the Historical Society of World War I volunteers from the Red Cross, and they're passing out coffee and presumably sandwiches or something to engineers that were making their way to New York. And Union Station, I mentioned in the book, has a long history of coffee and hospitality.
You talk about in the book about Union Station, and there was a cafe, I think, just for soldiers that would pass through Union Station,
yeah, right? Yeah, the USO was there for many, many years, and before moving to the airport. But really, coffee helped to fuel our troops dating back to the Civil War. And there the soldiers would sometimes have to grind the beans that were roasted with the butts of their rifle.
What? You're kidding. Was there ever a time that where the experts said coffee wasn't good for you?
I think there has been concern about the amount of caffeine and what that does. I'm not a nutritionist, so I can't really speak to that very intelligently. But I know that there's also benefits from drinking coffee. It helps with your mental state, let's say. It helps to keep one sharp when one needs to be sharp.
And we could all use a little help there. Let's look at this next image. You call it the old judge line. What's that?
Yeah. Well, that's actually a photo of Dana Brown.
Okay, we'll skip to this one then. I remember this from a kid watching these commercials.
Yes, many of us grew up watching these commercials. Dana Brown actually, though, got his start with the Manhattan Coffee Company in the mid-40s. And he left that company because they were starting to question the expense of his research trips to Africa. But he's then launched his own private brand, Safari brand, and all through the 60s, we grew up watching the commercials, and the animal skin wrapped cans are just burned into my memory.
Right. I wanted to ask you, in your book, it seems like you sort of identify 3 time periods when you're talking about the history of coffee. Mm-hmm. You identify a period from 1900 to 1929, from 1930 to 1949, from 1950 to 1979, and then from 1980 on. Mm-hmm. Why those classifications?
Well, I think that it was important to sort of showcase how coffee grew and developed and then kind of waned and then had another what we call the third wave. After the Second World War, coffee in America became a real homogeneous kind of a product. The beans were your average quality of beans coming from Brazil. It all sort of tasted the same. So companies had to go to great lengths with advertising to get people to be loyal to their brand. So then by the 70s, in the 60s, we had a lot of coffee houses, some people may remember, at Gaslight Square. But our what we call the third wave of coffee really hit here in St. Louis in the 90s when Caldi's opened many years before that large national brand showed up at the airport.
Oh, yeah, them.
Yeah, them.
I want to talk just a little about you real quickly before we run out of time, because you've written a few other books. You've done one about the culinary history of Missouri.
Yes, right. The culinary history I co-authored with a colleague of mine, and that came out with the History Press in 2021. And actually, by researching something for that particular project, I stumbled upon our history about coffee here.
And if coffee wasn't good enough, you also wrote a book sort of about chocolate.
Yes, I wrote a book in 2016 that showcases the various chocolate makers throughout Missouri. There's a number of wonderful chocolate shops.
And tell me about 3womeninthekitchen.com.
That is my food blog that champions home cooks and comfort food recipes that I started in August of 20 when everybody was at home because of the great sickness, cooking and probably rediscovering homemade bread after many years and so on. So that's something that I still continue and post every week too.
And what about these coffee pods? I think back to when I miss the old percolating coffee, that your mom would have out.
Oh, yeah, we have one, yeah. And I remember when we got our first Mr. Coffee machine.
What about these pods where you put it in, you got your cup in 30 seconds?
I know. They're so convenient, but I think there's a better way to make a better pot of coffee with a simple French press pot you get at IKEA.
Well, Deborah Reinhardt at St. Louis Coffee, a stimulating history. And you can go to historypress.com. Anywhere else that we can look for your book?
The book is available at the gift shop at the History Museum as well, and I know it's at Barnes & Noble shops across the area.
Well, Deborah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
and
delightful
I'll
to
think
meet
of you
you.
tomorrow morning when I percolate my coffee pot.
Great, that's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank
Coffee.
you.
Can't live without it. I'm Steve Potter. Thanks for joining us today on City Corner. We'll see you next time. Cheers. Right?
Right.